you never touch the edge of what's really going on. You've lost the capacity, by virtue of the definitions you've given everything, to recognize God in any of it, or to recognize the Christ in your brother. So what does this mean? It means that the change in curriculum is the abandoning of the utilization of memory, of everything that you've been taught, of everything that you've taught yourself, because you weren't awake when you were applying the definitions to everything. And therefore, your perception of it all is flawed. And yet you rely upon this every day and use it as the means of governing yourself and everyone else you can. Continuing, the first change that must be introduced is a change in direction. A meaningful curriculum cannot be inconsistent. If it is planned by two teachers, each believing in diametrically opposed ideas, it cannot be integrated. Is that clear? It cannot be integrated. If it means it can't be integrated, it means that what the Holy Spirit reveals to you cannot be applied to the world you're seeing. And it cannot be applied to the self you think you are. Therefore, it isn't going to help the self you think you are improve and have better control or better anything. Changing directions, turning around 180 degrees, means not relying upon yourself at all. If you are, you haven't changed direction 180 degrees and you're still heading away from home and fooling yourself into believing that this direction doesn't take you away as far as fast. And that's an improvement. That's theological thinking. Again, if the curriculum is planned by two teachers, in other words, who you think you are, and God, or the Holy Spirit, each believing in diametrically opposed ideas, it cannot be integrated. If it is carried out by these two teachers simultaneously, each one merely interferes with the other. This leads to fluctuation. You might say unevenness, but not to change. The volatile have no direction. They cannot choose one because they cannot relinquish the other, even if the other does not exist. Their conflicted curriculum teaches them all directions exist and gives them no rationale for choice. Haven't you heard it? Everyone has their own reality. All directions exist. And when you say that, it gives you no rationale for choice. And that's where the insanity lies, in the New Age thinking that everyone creates their own reality. That's the way it works. That's the truth. That is the key to your freedom. No, it's the key to the loss of your freedom, because it gives you no rationale for choice. Continuing, the total senselessness of such a curriculum must be fully recognized before a real change in direction becomes possible. And you know, that's the hardest part. Arriving at a point where you're clear enough to say that the choices you've been making aren't working, they can't work, and as long as you persist in that direction, you will suffer, and that doesn't make sense for you any longer. Until that which you have cherished becomes recognizably unwanted, you will not change direction. You say, well, I know people who are really demonstrating in their life that their choices are causing their suffering. They're in and out of jail, they're always having fights, they're disagreeable, they are antisocial. Everything they are doing is obviously creating suffering for them. But I'm not having that experience. The way I'm using my mind is keeping me from having those experiences. I've learned how to make better choices. Well, not being as miserable as someone else doesn't truly mean that you're not experiencing misery. Boy, I'm glad I'm not in their shoes. But damn, how am I going to make it this month? Things are really tight and I'm very uneasy about it. You see, you're not experiencing joy. You're not experiencing freedom from need. You are not bubbling over with inspiration and insight, which, when you express it, makes everyone around you feel better, or which promotes greater clarity for them. So be careful of these silly comparisons that you use to say, I'm not miserable. I'm not as miserable as so-and-so. I didn't spend 3 months in jail I didn't spend 3 months in jail. I didn't get sodomized. I didn't get stabbed. And I didn't run into an old buddy when I was released from jail who immediately enticed me back into another situation. I've got it good. No, you don't. If you're still operating on a course that's 180 degrees out of sync with your fulfillment, you're not better off. And you've got to arrive at a point where you stop being satisfied with just not having as much trouble as Joe down the street. You've got to arrive at a point where you say, although I'm not as miserable as Joe down the street, I am not consistently happy. I am not consistently free of fear. In fact, even though I'm generally happy, there is always an undercurrent of fear. There's always a feeling of vulnerability that may rear its head at any time and throw me off guard, even though, for the last year I've done pretty well at not having those kind of experiences. You've got to arrive at a point where you say, no matter how much less miserable I am than Joe down the street, it's not my birthright to be miserable to any degree, and I am going to change direction and learn from a different teacher that brings me back into the fullness of what I am, and an untarnished and undistorted conscious experience of everything as it truly is. Again, and mind you that this is speaking of your relatively good experiences of life that for most of your life have been better than Joe down the street. The total senselessness of such a curriculum that says all directions exist, must be fully recognized before a real change in direction becomes possible. You cannot learn simultaneously from two teachers who are in total disagreement about everything. What you call your ego is in total disagreement with God. You didn't get half a divorce from God. You got a whole divorce. You said, I want to see things my way. You got a total divorce from God, and therefore, the way you're being is in total disagreement with God. Well, what's another way of saying that? It means you're in total disagreement or misalignment with the way things work. That is perhaps a little less threatening than saying you're in total disagreement with God. If you are choosing to be at odds with the way things work, you are in total disagreement with the way things work, but at least in your mind, you're able to conceive of the fact that the words, the way things work, mean something that is unchangeable, and that you are either going to cooperate with and experience harmony, or be uncooperative with and experience suffering. You see, your ego might want to say, but I'm not in total disagreement with God, and fuss about the words. But if you're not in agreement, If you're being feisty and trying to be original and not fit in to the way things work, it's obvious to you that you will not be happy, and it's easy for you to see that at the bottom line, you really don't want to fit in, because you'll become nothing. You'll just be a cog or a wheel in the machine. You won't stand out. And you don't want that. Well, if you want to change directions, you've got to start wanting that. Again, you cannot learn simultaneously from two teachers who are in total disagreement about everything. Their joint curriculum presents an impossible learning task. They are teaching you entirely different things in entirely different ways, which might be possible except for the crucial fact that both are teaching you about yourself. They are teaching you opposite things about yourself. Now, if your ego is nothing more than you wearing a mask, then you are being one of the teachers incognito. And the only thing you can teach is what's stored in your memory. And what's stored in your memory is distorted because it was being viewed by a self that doesn't really exist. And even in its supposititious existence, had the task of defining everything differently from what the Father was being right there in everything. Therefore, everything that you behind the mask are teaching is false. It's not the end of the world to realize that. It's essential. Because until you realize that in the tips of your toes, you will not, from the tips of your toes, engage in reversing your direction and coming swiftly back into your right mind. Continuing, your reality, your true reality, is unaffected by both. It's unaffected by what you divinely are, is unaffected by the voice for truth or the voice for fear. Because the voice for truth uncovers what you are. It doesn't change what you are. It reveals you, what you divinely are to you, and re-engages your mind in the conscious experience of what you are. So it doesn't affect you, even though it heals your mind of the misperceptions that have kept you caught in suffering. Your reality is unaffected by both. But if you listen to both, your mind will be split about what your reality is. I'll tell you something, the truth is self-confirming. And so as you begin to head for home, as you do an about face and move in the direction of the only curriculum there is, which is the undoing of your steps away from home, and truth dawns in your minds more and more clearly, the teaching of the other voice is going to become more and more difficult to tolerate. It's going to become more and more problematic. It's going to become more and more intolerable to you. It's going to be clearer to you that it doesn't work and that it can't work, even though you slip from time to time, and try to employ it. And what had been familiar to you and a comfort to you will now be more and more distressing. There's a benefit in this. Because if you don't resist the simple truth of what I just said as you experience it, it will provide you with further conviction and commitment on retracing your steps, on engaging in the course in miracles. Miracles are sudden shifts of perception. Not only that, they are sudden shifts of perception about what you had been misperceiving. Sudden shifts of perception about what you had been misunderstanding. So that you are no longer suffering about this particular misunderstanding or that one. And you're not having the experience of misperception regarding this or that. Is it clear to everyone, that this course is not a head trip? It's not some intellectual process. It's not the collecting of intellectual tidbits that are stimulating, but because they're never incorporated, promote no change. But boy, they can sure make you the life of the party. They can sure create a lot of discussion and a lot of activity. A Course in Miracles is not an intellectual process. It's about changing your mind more correctly, it's about letting your mind be changed. Because you're accepting a new teacher. And you're giving your allegiance to a new teacher. And you are undoing the steps you took away from your sanity, from your wholeness, and from the joy of being. The next section is called The Rationale for Choice. You see, it's absolutely essential to make a choice. can't just say, well, God is love, and God will take care of everything, and I will just flow. I'll just get in the flow, and I will be in my peace no matter what happens. I will be in my peace no matter how I misperceive things. It's all God. It's all God. No, it's not. Your misperceptions are not all God. And your misperceptions are blinding you to what is all God. And your misperceptions about who and what you are blinding you to the sane, integrated, singular experience of what you are. Oh, but I much prefer to be open-minded. I much prefer to have a much broader perspective in which everything is okay, in which I'm not called upon to make judgment about anything, because, of course, judgment is bad. Well, excuse me. How can you make a choice without judgment? How can you make a choice between what works and what doesn't work without recognizing the difference? Back to the book. There is a rationale for choice. Well, so much for, it's all God. So much for, everyone makes up their own reality. Everyone is experiencing their own reality, and that's life. So much for that. There is a rationale for choice. Only one teacher knows what your reality is. If learning that is the purpose of the curriculum, you must learn it of him, that teacher. Am I really making it too hard? Am I really encouraging you to want things to be too perfect? I mean, none of you in this room are suffering that much. You're not that miserable. And yet I'm asking you not to be satisfied in your subtle misery. I'm asking you to be as intolerant of it as you would be the pain you would feel if someone threw acid in your face. Oh, but it's not called for. I mean, how perfect do you want me to strive? How much perfection do you want me to strive for? I want you not to strive for perfection, but I want you to be completely willing to allow it, which is already the truth about you, to register with you consciously. It doesn't take struggle or strife, but it takes